Rethinking History. Quote, "History is a Mississippi of lies." Voltaire. Part of the modern esoteric alternative narrative will involve a total rethinking of history as we know it. We already suspect that history as taught in Western schools is not only rife with ignorance, but a highly censored version of what really occurred on Earth, both long ago and in the short term. In the myopic, edited version, humans went through a long evolutionary process from monkey to man. Then civilization simply began in Mesopotamia around 7,000 years ago, split into different branches, yet somehow all civilizations are junior to the West. Based on overwhelming archaeological and historical evidence, however, it becomes clear that there are advanced civilizations here on Earth over 14,000 years ago, and possibly were here much longer. From communications about our ancient origins to different versions of Christianity, there is much about our history that has not been disclosed. Perhaps opening the Vatican Library to international scholars would be a good place to start. There has been a long-standing accusation that humans are not aware of their own true history on Earth. What if we could re-examine the history of civilization through a different lens? What if we looked at all the evidence, photos, testimonies, and weird discoveries about our mysterious past, including lost worlds, mysterious civilizations, and ancient technology? Would the result alter the collective opinion of who we are? What of the many enlightened masters who have walked the earth to help advance the cause of humanity? What have they taught us that still applies today? If we've forgotten our life story on Earth, how can we proceed forward into the future when we don't truly understand our past? Research of precursors like Lloyd Pye, Mauro Biglino, and R.A. Boulay into anthropological studies show us that an entirely different historical view of humankind is unfolding. These researchers suggest that we were a slave race engineered by the gods and not evolved from apes. Over the decades, there have been many strange discoveries, although most of them have been conveniently covered up, or the evidence has mysteriously been lost. Taken together with our perceptions, our human biology, knowledge of past lives, the potential of game-changing technology, and simply a better understanding of ourselves, it would appear our history books need a major revision. Let's examine the esoteric view of history, first by looking at a few accomplishments of ancient technology that still have experts scratching their heads. Ancient technology. The question of ancient technology becomes more pressing, but even harder to understand when one considers how the giant stones of ancient building sites were actually cut, tooled, and moved. This incredible stone cutting precision is a total mystery. Equally mysterious, considering megalithic times, is the extraordinary weights involved. How did very early humans raise blocks of 100 tons or more, transport them, and precisely set them into place? Astonishing ingenuity was utilized in their construction, which clearly employed principles that are not fully recognized even today. Could such principles have included some kind of levitation? There are very persistent references from the classical writers alluding to the power of sound, or the use of song, music, and tone to make things lighter, something known as auditive levitation. Songs or chanting could allow a rhythm to develop and rise up, and that in turn facilitated seemingly superhuman abilities whereby workers could move enormous heavy objects with little, human effort. One of the most mysterious objects from ancient times was recovered from 40 meters below the surface in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, sometime around Easter in the year 1900. It was discovered by Elias Standitos, a Greek sponge diver working off the coast of Antikythera, a small island near Crete. He found part of the ancient Roman freighter that included statues and other materials that dated the shipwreck to around 80 BCE. The most intriguing artifact recovered, the Antikythera device, as he named it, remained an enigma for the next 49 years until Dick Price, a professor of science history at Yale University, discovered what the machine had the capacity to compute. He determined it was a mechanical analog computer, an instrument 2 millennia ahead of its time. Quote, "It was like finding a turbojet in Tutankhamun's tomb," Price wrote in his June 1959 article, An Ancient Greek Computer, for Scientific American. He specifically noted that the Antikythera device used a differential gear not reinvented until the mid-1500s to compute the synodic lunar cycle by subtracting the effects of the sidereal lunar movement, thereby calculating the motions of stars and planets. This function makes the artifact far more advanced than its 16th century differential gear, bringing the technology of the Antikythera device into the space age. Such a device would have been invaluable to any mariner. Another mysterious ancient device was the golden sun disk of Mu, which in more recent times was reversed engineered to create the looking glass technology, allowing us a glimpse into past timelines and probable views of the future. The original sun disk, according to the Peruvian records of the elder race, made use of the naturally occurring gravitational null node, also called a vortex, a dead spot, or in conventional science, a wormhole, as described by the Einstein-Rosen bridge. Both modern and ancient devices allowed simple access to the coordinate time realm through the use of vibrational control, which in ancient times was invoked through song, chant, mantra, and musical instruments. The sun disk also had the ability to remote view, which was how a destination was determined by a priest who could use it for astral travel. Using song, mantra, and music, the priest could fine-tune the device to a very specific destination that could be seen in the device before actually making the transit. It works with coordinate time, hence controlled by waveforms, music, mantra, chanting, singing, and the like. In January 2013, the Voice of Russia and other Russian sources reported that a 300-million-year-old piece of aluminum machinery had been found in the Siberian city of Vladivostok. Experts say the gear rail must have been manufactured and could not have been the result of natural forces. The artifact came to researchers' attention when a resident of Vladivostok was lighting a fire during a cold winter evening. He noticed a rail-shaped piece of metal fused into a lump of coal he was using to heat his home. Mesmerized by his discovery, the responsible citizen decided to seek help from the scientists of the nearby Primorye region. After the metal object was studied by Russian experts, the man was shocked to learn about the assumed age of his discovery. The metal rail was supposedly 300 million years old, and the scientists made yet another shocking revelation. They told the man that it was not created by nature, but rather was manufactured, and quite possibly of an ET origin. The find is universally described as a toothed metal rail, and without a doubt, created artificially. The question of what culture or group might have made this aluminum gear back in the pre-dawn of time remains a mystery. The Wayback Machine. In one timeline describing the fabulous expanse of civilization on Earth, there is scientific evidence for a deluge that engulfed the Earth as described in the story of Noah's Ark. However, such global flooding has not occurred in over 2 million years. Using the terms alpha as our beginning point and omega as the end point, the cycle of the human journey begins and ends with absolute perfection. That is, supreme human beings lived in an elevated state of existence during the antediluvian civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria, or possibly even much earlier, and then experienced a sharp decline into the more primitive state we've experienced in recent history. Underneath the miles of ice in Antarctica, there could be evidence of these previous civilizations. As the fossil record shows, this location previously had a temperature climate before the pole shifts occurred. The further we look back in history, the more we see what appears to be a prefabricated society in its most refined form, and then descending through the long decline trajectory until the culture blends into ours. The Egyptians, Indus, and Sumerian civilizations all seem to appear out of nowhere, fully equipped with advanced knowledge, and from the onset at the apex of their cultural development. In the case of Egypt, the oldest structures, such as the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids, are of the highest architectural quality and remain the best preserved known structures to stand the test of time. Later built pyramids are of a lesser quality, and in fact, some have literally collapsed due to poor design. In the case of Sumer, there were groups of Akkadians and the ancestors of present-day Bedouins surrounding the area in which they emerged, yet all seem to be culturally unassociated with the Sumerians. It has been established that in ancient Sumer, a sudden plethora of scientific achievements burst upon the scene in a very short period of time, including the wheel, written language, a sophisticated calendar, music and song, map making, and a standard exchange system, among other fascinating innovations. The Indus River civilizations of old India also show signs of early cultural refinement. This suggests that the oldest Egyptian, Indus, and Sumerian societies possessed a higher quality of knowledge than their descendants. This is a key sign suggesting that technology is inherited from another culture and not developed indigenously, since knowledge of how to use the obtained information has been lost through the generations. In short, the oldest cultural legacies reached their highest level of advancement at their earliest stages and were merely the legacy of civilizations far more ancient and long forgotten from our collective memory. The esoteric view of the Egyptians, Indians, and Sumerians suggests civilized humans have existed on this planet for many tens of thousands of years, with some accounts going into the millions of years. Sacred geometry in ancient structures. The construction of the three great pyramids in Egypt follow principles of sacred geometry. For example, they are linked together mathematically by the golden section, rediscovered by Leonardo da Vinci, who lived from 1452 to 1519, who provided the name. The golden section is a spiral in the canon of ancient geometry, and it is used in the design of sacred architecture. It was valued as the most desirable proportion because it is expressed in the patterns of natural forms. These include animal horns, sea mollusks, the formation of the human fetus, comic nebulae, which is the ratio between planetary orbits, the laws of Mendelian heredity, the movement of flowers following the path of the sun, called heliotropism, and especially within whirlpools, and thousands of other examples observed in nature. The golden section appears in a nautilus shell when its exterior wall is removed to expose the spiral inside. This would be a pretty impressive insight for the Stone Age builders of the Great Pyramids to conceive, if we are to believe conventional archaeologists. The construction of the Great Pyramids is the legacy of the Atlanteans, which was an extension of the Lemurian civilization that existed on Earth over 4 million years ago, as we'll explore in the next chapter. In esoteric traditions, the Atlanteans are viewed as supreme beings who are much more evolved than humans are today. The real secret of pharaonic Egypt, from which Freemasonry purportedly arose, is the attainment of the light body, from where the word Illuminati derives. This would be the highest teaching conferred upon initiates in the king's chamber, an enigmatic room located deep inside the Great Pyramid. This esoteric knowledge was introduced from Egypt by Moses into Judaism. It was later recorded on the copper scrolls, presumably hidden beneath the temple in Jerusalem, and uncovered centuries later by the Knights Templar, who also incorporated sacred geometry into their buildings. Another expression of sacred geometry is the sort of shadow cast by the second pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, upon the Great Pyramid at sunset on December 21st every year. The winter solstice shadow actually forms a golden triangle when truncated by the vertical line running up the middle of the south face of the Great Pyramid and lining up with a purposeful indentation of a few inches in the construction of the side of the pyramid. This apothegm, as geometers call such vertical lines, forms a right angle and transforms the solstice shadow into a perfect golden triangle. Considering that this shadow is cast upon the Great Pyramid on each winter solstice to form a perfect golden triangle, it can hardly have been a coincidence, and further illustrates that all three pyramids were built as part of a unified plan. Not far from the Giza Plateau, but built much later, stands the Pharos Lighthouse, also called the Lighthouse of Alexandria, a tower built between 280 and 247 BCE on the island of Pharos at Alexandria, Egypt. It rose to 280 Old Kingdom royal cubits, or 146.5 meters, which is the same height as the Great Pyramid. Such a salient relationship was hardly coincidental, demonstrating that both structures, despite the millennia separating their construction, were built according to the same principles of sacred geometry. This organizational unity began with all three pyramids on the Giza Plateau. The legacy of Egypt. Solon, a wise man from Greece, traveled to Egypt and returned to report to his countrymen the existence of Atlantis. This was information he received from 97 Egyptian high priests, such as Pasinaphis of Heliopolis and Sontius of Sais, two wise men with whom he studied while in Egypt. Plato's references to Atlantis were borrowed from the writings of the Greek philosopher Solon, who was given the information by the Egyptian priests who referred to Atlantis as Kepchu, which also happens to be the Egyptian name for the people of Crete. Some of the survivors of the Minoan volcanic disaster asked Egypt for help at the time of their destruction in 1500 BCE, since Egypt was the only other civilization with high culture in the Mediterranean world at that time. What can the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx in Egypt teach us? What was the function of the Osirian and other awesome megalithic sites of unknown origin found throughout Egypt? Heavy water erosion on the Sphinx, which could only have taken place no more recently than about 7,000 years ago, when heavy rain was common in the area, suggests a much older date for its construction than is generally accepted. The Great Pyramid and neighboring Osirian Temple also feature megalithic stone architecture that still puzzles experts. It is curious to note that very little writing is found in the Osirian Temple, although there is one very significant piece of information in that temple. It is a very faint but clear and precise drawing of 64 uniform petals called the flower of life. It is not etched into the rock nor carved. It is burned into the atomic structure of the rock in some extraordinary way. Were the high knowledge and advanced architecture techniques of the ancient Egyptians brought to the Nile Valley by the survivors of an earlier civilization around 12,500 years ago? At the end of the last ice age, an epoch referred to in the Egyptian Book of the Dead as Zep Tepi, or the first time? The ancient monuments of the Giza Plateau also hint at the possibility of a very advanced lost civilization from previous times, and could be a reference to Atlantis. This much older time frame, when most of Egypt and the Sahara were fertile land, is called the Osiris Empire of pre-sand Egypt. The Giza pyramids stand as testament to the time when humans were allied to the Galactic Federation, forming part of the Osirian Empire and the legacy of Atlantis. The three pyramids of Giza are arranged in a squared triangle. Their sides are in perfect 3:4:5 ratio to each other. There are many other tantalizing clues to their ancient origin, and many pieces of evidence that prove their real age and function. But this has been covered up in a scandal called Egyptgate. For example, using sonar technology, tunnels and massive chambers have been discovered directly underneath the Sphinx and connect on several levels underneath the Giza Plateau. The tunnels were recently explored and filmed. Once the videos were released, the entrance was promptly sealed off. The Temple of Birds, where the entrance passage was discovered, is no longer accessible. There are rumors that underneath the Great Pyramids and Sphinx are located many sacred chambers, including the Hall of Records, a very old and still operational ET base called Kamagal 2, and even a large disc-shaped craft at the lowest level. Underneath the right paw of the Sphinx, far below in some of the deepest chambers, the mythical Akashic records can be found. But the general public will not be learning about this from conventional archaeologists. The pyramids of Giza are such fantastic monuments with no previously built examples that the only logical conclusion is they must be the legacy of something older and much greater. The Egyptian Sphinx, next to the Great Pyramids, is a statue of a reclining lion with a human head. It is located on the Giza Plateau along the west bank of the Nile, near modern-day Cairo. The Sphinx, with its recumbent lion body, was carved in the age of Leo and is positioned to gaze due east. It is the largest monolith statue and the oldest known monumental sculpture in the world. It extends 73.5 meters in length, 6 meters wide, and 20.22 meters high. The Sphinx, or the Lion Man, is the interpretation, represents the zodiac sign of Leo and Aquarius. When the Sphinx was built some 12,000 years ago in the age of Leo, it faced almost due east, that is, when the equinox point was in the age of Leo. In the current age of Aquarius, the Sphinx will be facing Aquarius 180 degrees rotated from its original position. The position of the three nearby Giza pyramids relate to the four cardinal compass points, and they correspond to the three stars in Orion's belt. They mark the constellations of their terrestrial counterparts on the Giza Plateau, an alignment observed at sunrise on the spring equinox, and thereby correspond to a building date of 12,500 years ago. This also matches the time frame of the Osiris Empire. Mesoamerican pyramid cultures. The monumental architecture of Tiwanaku, located in present-day Bolivia, is characterized by large stones of exceptional workmanship. In contrast to the masonry style of the later Inca culture, Tiwanaku's stone architecture usually employs rectangular ashlar blocks laid in regular course, and monumental structures were frequently fitted with elaborate drainage systems. Bronze or copper double T clamps were frequently used to anchor large blocks in place. The stone used to build Tiwanaku was quarried and then transported 40 kilometers or more to the city. They were moved without the aid of the wheel, although some of the distance was over water. The Acapana Pyramid at Tiwanaku is a terraced pyramid predating the Inca Empire by many centuries. It is faced with accurately hewn and artistically joined blocks and are comparable to those found on Easter Island. This discovery proves that Inca builders learned their impressive craft of masonry from their predecessors in Tiwanaku. The ground plan of this unified pyramid is only slightly smaller than the dimensions of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The crowning achievement of the Inca culture is Machu Picchu, which is a Quechua Indian word for old peak. This pre-Columbian Inca site is an engineering marvel and located 2,400 meters above sea level. It is situated on a mountain ridge high above the Urubamba Valley in Peru, 80 kilometers northwest of the ancient capital of Cuzco. Often referred to as the lost city of the Incas, Machu Picchu is probably the most familiar symbol of the Inca Empire. Another mysterious Inca city in Peru, the city of Ollantaytambo, is also known for its megalithic stone ruins. The finely cut rocks and plantation terraces were very large obstacles for Spanish conquistadors. The fortress was also used by Inca rebel Manco to conduct successful attacks on Francisco Pizarro and other conquistadors based in Lima. Lastly, the Incan temple of Pachacamac is an architectural site 40 kilometers southeast of Lima, Peru, in the valley of the Lurin River. It had at least one pyramid. The Inca used Pachacamac primarily as a religious site for the veneration of the Pachacamac, creator god, and also as an important administrative center. The unique prehistoric cultures of Mesoamerica, meaning Middle America, developed over many thousands of years in relative isolation. Beginning some 3,500 years ago, the Olmec were the first to build large cities and megalithic carvings in stone, leaving behind the beginnings of a culture soon to influence later civilization. An interesting facet of the Olmec is their distinct negroid features, which can be seen on the large statues of head left behind, and suggesting an African connection. The Olmec also left behind platform mound pyramids. The Zapotecs borrowed from the Olmec culture, as did the Maya, the Toltecs, and then the Aztecs. One common thread of all prehistoric cultures following the Olmec was the ceremonial ball game. Players were required to skillfully manipulate a heavy rubber ball with hips, thighs, and shoulders, but not arms or hands. The ball game was a sport as well as a sacred ritual, and human sacrifice was often the final outcome. The ball game was played throughout Mesoamerica and even in the southwest of North America by many overlapping civilizations. Stone-carved ball courts were erected in many sacred cities in Central America and what is now the Four Corners region of the United States. The last remnant of the Great Pyramid civilizations arose at Tehuacan, Mexico, around 200 BCE. The Aztec name given to the site means place of the gods, or the place where men become gods. Like the astronomical configuration of the Giza pyramids in Egypt, the entire complex is a precise scale model of our solar system and accurately reflects the orbital distances of the inner planets, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and even Pluto. Since the planet Uranus was not discovered with modern Earth telescopes until 1787 and Pluto not until 1930, it is apparent that the builders had information from outside sources. Furthermore, Teotihuacan is located at the latitude of 19.47 degrees north of the equator, which corresponds to the mathematics of a tetrahedron within a sphere, where the bottom tip is at the South Pole and the corners come to meet the sphere at 19.47 degrees north. Enter the Maya. In one of the greatest historical mysteries of all time, an enlightened people emerged, then all but vanished in the span of 1,000 years. Around the 3rd century CE, the Mayas were building tall, gleaming pyramids of stone and mortar amid their corn patches in the steamy Guatemalan jungles. The classic period of the Mayans suddenly faltered and began fading out around the 10th century CE. Eventually, the beautiful ceremonial cities in the southern lowlands stood silent and deserted. Yet, less than a century later, the Mayans were back, this time aligned with the Toltecs in the northern part of the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula. Here, the post-classic Renaissance reigned until 1450, when the Mayas once again faded away, this time forever. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1527, the finest buildings of the Mayan Renaissance were overgrown ruins. In total, the ancient Maya inhabited a territory extending over 400,000 square kilometers in the Mexican states of Yucatan, Campeche, Quintana Roo, Tabasco, and Chiapas, as well as the present-day countries of Guatemala, Belize, and parts of El Salvador and Honduras. Descendants of the Maya are alive and well today. In fact, there are an estimated 2.5 million Mayans now living in Mexico and various Central American countries. It has been discovered through DNA testing that the Maya originated in Mongolia, crossed the Bering Strait ice bridge, and continued south where they settled in Central America. There have been over 100 Mayan cities found in the former Maya homelands, but to date, only 10% are accessible to the public. The ancient Maya were among the most advanced cultures, a people who understood the physical cosmos, erected impressive pyramid temples, and had a complex written language, and developed an extraordinarily accurate way of understanding time. The Mayans are considered to be the leaders and pioneers of the great sciences of astronomy and mathematics during the high cultures of Mesoamerica. One of their greatest achievements was a profound understanding of the solar system, and of their architecture is based on astronomic observations. 5 centuries before Galileo Galilei charted the movement of the planets, the Maya knew that the center of our solar system was the sun and not the earth. The sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce conducted several readings about the ancestors of Atlantis as landing in the Yucatan and importing their high culture. Among their gifts to humanity, according to Cayce, were several artifacts detailing the long history of world civilization and installed in the form of a hall of records. Cayce named 3 locations worldwide where identical records were stored: Giza in Egypt below the Sphinx, inside a collapsed temple under the Atlantic Ocean near Bimini, and below a temple in the Yucatan. Although Cayce never named Piedras Negras in Guatemala by name, or any other site in the Yucatan as the specific location of a hall of records, it is quite possible that Piedras Negras is built atop a much older temple. Cayce specifically named the Yucatan as the location of Iltar's covered temple. Iltar was a high priest who attempted to preserve the records of Atlantis by transcribing their ancient history in stone. In his famous reading of December 1933, Cayce said, quote, "These stones are now, during the last few months, being uncovered." The stones Cayce referred to were associated with crystal firestones that apparently gave the Atlanteans their power. Further along in the reading, Cayce reveals that an emblem representing the stones would be carried to the Pennsylvania State Museum. If Cayce's time frame is correct, the only excavation in the Yucatan region in 1933 were the excavations at Piedras Negras, conducted by the University of Pennsylvania. Several artifacts were returned to Pennsylvania in the year Cayce mentioned, including a calcite vessel and fragments of a paramagnetic stone known as hematite. To date, the Hall of Records has not been discovered at Piedras Negras, nor anywhere else in Central America. Old India. Hinduism is the world's oldest major religion still practiced today. Its earliest origins can be traced to the ancient Vedic civilization, with a conglomerate of diverse beliefs and traditions. Yet Hinduism has no single founder. Although some tenets of the faith are accepted by most Hindus, scholars have found it difficult to identify any doctrines with universal acceptance among all denominations. Prominent themes in Hindu beliefs include dharma, the ethics and duties; samsara, the continuing cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Karma, action and subsequent reaction. Moksha, liberation from samsara, and the various yogas, paths, or practices. A devout Hindu believes that to die and be cremated in the holy Indian city of Varanasi is to gain moksha, or release from the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The Vedas are the primary texts of Hinduism. They are a large corpus of texts originating in ancient India. These sacred scriptures are among the oldest written records in the history of humankind and are among the most ancient religious texts still in existence. They include the esteemed Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Babylonian creation myth Enuma Elish, the I Ching of China, and the Avesta of Zoroastrianism. The Vedas are certainly the oldest sacred texts in Hinduism. Vedic mantras are recited at Hindu prayers, religious functions, and other auspicious occasions. Each Veda contains thousands of hymns and several sections of incantations and rituals from ancient India. Some of the oldest Vedic hymns, especially the hymns of the Rig Veda, are considered to be at least 6,000 to 8,000 years old. The Vedas are believed to be revealed scriptures because they are considered to be divine in origin. According to Hindu tradition, the Vedas are not human compositions, having been directly revealed, and thus are called Suruti, or what is heard, and form the foundation of the Brahmaical system of religious belief. Besides their spiritual value, they give a unique view of everyday life in India from some 4,000 years ago. The Vedas are also the most ancient, extensive texts in any Indo-European language group and are invaluable in the study of comparative linguistics. There are 4 major Vedas called the Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajur Veda, and Anthrava Veda, and all have had a vast influence on Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Traditionally, the text of the Vedas is said to be of equal age with the universe. Scholars have determined that the Rig Veda, the oldest of the 4 Vedas, was composed about 1500 BCE and codified around 600 BCE. It is unknown when it was finally committed to writing, but likely after 300 BCE. The Vedic hymns were first known to have been translated into the Greek language shortly after Alexander the Great annexed the Indus River region. This was the period of cultural revolution in Western civilization that transformed crude and brutal tribal cultures into democratic republics based on more reasonable conduct. Homer, the blind Greek poet, wrote stories of the gods that could have been borrowed and modified from earlier sources, including the Vedic texts, Sumerian cuneiform, or Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. His poems, as well as many other myths of the ancient world, are very accurate descriptions of the exploits of humans over 3,000 years ago. The somewhat ambiguous term Veda means knowledge, or variously a type of sacred lore, since it embraces such a large body of ancient Indian writings. The term is somewhat open to interpretation. Successive generations of Indian people learned the Vedic verses and then passed them along to others, saying that they came from the gods and not their human counterparts. Eventually, the concept of the verses was written down, codified, and adopted verbatim as truth. The euphemistic and metaphorical content of the Veda became accepted and practiced as dogmatic fact. The philosophy of the verses was ignored, and the verses became the genesis of nearly every emerging religious practice in existence, most notably the complex Hindu faith. Vimana craft. Vimana is a Vedic term with several meanings, ranging from temple or palace to mythological flying machines, as described in Sanskrit epics. Reference to ancient flying vehicles derive mostly from old Indian sources, but there are references emerging from other foreign scripts and hundreds of references from ancient Indian epics. Most of them have not been translated into English from the old Sanskrit. The Hindu Vedas offer a description of the Vimanas, including a detailed section on Vimanas from the Mahabharata. Vedic texts describe various kinds of aircraft. The epic tale called the Ramanya specifically mentions aircraft hangars. The Sif-Rala text, which originated in the Chaldean era, comprises around 100 written pages of technical plans on building a flying machine. Some of the Vedic texts, which go back to the dawn of conscious thought, describe epic air battles, fantastic weaponry, anti-gravity aircraft, and even descriptions of a preemptive nuclear strike. One interesting Veda called Samaraganara Sutrahara gives technical specifications for building an advanced flying craft as follows. Strong and durable must the body of the Vimana be made, like a great flying bird of light material. Inside, one must put the mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus underneath. By means of power latent in the mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in the sky. The movement of the Vimana are such that it can vertically ascend, vertically descend, or move slanting forwards and backwards. With the help of machines, human beings can fly through the air and heavenly beings can come down to earth. From another ancient account found in the Sanskrit epic of the Mahabharata, we are told that a Vimana measured 12 cubits in circumference with 4 strong wheels. Apart from its blazing missiles, the Mahabharata records the use of other deadly weapons that operated via a circular reflector. When switched on, it produced a shaft of light that could focus on any target and could immediately consume it with its power. This type of advanced weaponry sounds similar to the laser beam-like death rays invented by Nikola Tesla in the early 20th century. Around the year 2005, the Chinese discovered some Sanskrit documents in Lhasa, Tibet, and sent them to the University of Shanghai to be translated. University scholar Dr. Ruth Raya worked with a team who translated the documents and proclaimed that they contained instructions for building an interstellar spaceship. The method of propulsion was anti-gravitational and was based upon a system analogous to that of a lagmia, the unknown power of the ego existing in a person's psychological makeup, described as a centrifugal force strong enough to counteract all gravitational pull. According to Hindu yogi masters, it is this lagima which enables a person to levitate. Dr. Rina said that on board these machines, which were called astras in the text, the ancient Indians could have sent a detachment of people onto any planet. The manuscripts were also said to reveal the secret of Antima, the cap of invisibility, and Garima, all of which seem to be manipulations of gravity which instruct how to become as heavy as a mountain of lead. The recovered documents from Lhasa are thought to be 1,000 years old or more. A recovered Vimana? In December 2010, according to a leaked Russian briefing to Vladimir Putin when he was prime minister, there was a sudden urgent message to the most powerful leaders of the Western countries to visit a secret location in Afghanistan. The Western leaders traveled to Afghanistan to personally view a discovery by U.S. military scientists described as a Vimana, an ancient flying vehicle, entrapped in a time well. Attempts to remove it had already caused the disappearance of at least 8 American soldiers trying to dislodge the machine from the cave where it had been hidden for an estimated 5,000 years. The seemingly perpetual power source to this mysterious time well was described in a most peculiar report prepared by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service for Prime Minister Putin. The report said it appeared to be based on the technology of Edward Liskalian, who claimed to have discovered the secret knowledge of the ancients. From 1923 until 1951, Liskalian single-handedly and secretly carved over 1,100 tons of coral rock and moved massive boulders by an unknown process to construct one of the contemporary world's most mysterious accomplishments, and known as the Coral Castle in southern Florida. The alleged time well encasing the Vimana, the Russian report continues, appears to be an electromagnetic radiation gravity field, first postulated by Albert Einstein in his unified field theory. It has long been rumored that this field was behind the infamous American World War II experiment in teleportation called the Philadelphia experiment that in 1943, and similar to the events which occurred in Afghanistan, also caused the sudden disappearance of several U.S. soldiers. Another intriguing aspect of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service report is a statement that it was not just any Vimana that was discovered, but one that was property of an ancient prophet named Zoroaster. According to the ancient writings contained in the cave where it was discovered, the report claimed that its rightful owner was the founder of arguably one of the most important religions of all time, Zoroastrianism, a Persian blossoming. In 630 BCE, a master named Zoroaster created a distinct religious practice in Persia around the teachings of an advanced being named Ahura Mazda, whom he saw in a vision at the age of 30. This was another among the growing number of monotheistic religions blossoming around the world. Ahura Mazda taught Zoroaster the cardinal principles of the good religion. Several traits of Zoroastrianism can be traced back to the culture and beliefs of the Proto-Indian Iranian period, and Zoroastrianism consequently shares some elements with the historic Vedic religion that also has its origins in that era. Though little is known to the world today, the religious philosophy of Zoroaster is credited with being the basis of all known religions that proposed the purpose of humankind was to sustain asa, or truth. The modern Rotary Club is a fraternal organization established by the Zoroastrians. The most popularly known follower of Zoroastrianism were the Magi, also known as the wise men from the East in the Bible, famous for being the travelers who brought gifts to Bethlehem for the infant Jesus. The Italian explorer Marco Polo claimed to have seen the Magi graves in what is today the district of Sevilla, near Tehran, Iran. In English, the term Magi is the origin of the words magic and magician. In spite of its small number of current adherents, Zoroastrianism has played a colossal role in the study of comparative religions. Not only was it a cohort of the ancient Vedic Hinduism, but it also had a huge influence on the development of Judaism and Christianity. Central to Zoroastrianism is the emphasis on moral choice, or free will, to choose between the responsibility and duty to which one is born into the moral world. That is, to sustain asa, or truth, or to give up this duty and therefore facilitate the work of the opposite, druage. In the Avestian language, druage means lie. Similarly, predestination is rejected in Zoroastrian teaching. Humans bear responsibility for all situations they're in, and this is all based on the way we behave towards one another. Reward, punishment, happiness, and grief all depend on how individuals view their purpose and consequently live their lives. Similar to the principles of karma in Hinduism and Buddhism, in Zoroastrianism, good transpires for those who do righteous deeds. Those who do evil have themselves to blame for their ruin. Zoroastrianism morality can be summarized in the simple phrase, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, in that order. Thoughts are primary because from one's thought system, behavior follows. There is one universal and transcendental God named Ahura Mazda, who is the one uncreated creator and to whom all worship is ultimately directed, because all life is an extension of source, the idea of one, but with many names. Ahura Mazda's creation, evident as truth and order, is the antithesis of chaos, falsehood, and disorder. The resulting conflict involves the entire universe, including humanity, which has an active role to play in that conflict. Active participation in life through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds is necessary to ensure happiness and to keep the chaos at bay. This active participation of adherents is central element in Zoroaster's concept of free will. Pliny the Elder, the first century Roman author, naturalist, and natural philosopher, as well as being a naval and army commander in the early Roman Empire, names Zoroaster as the inventor of magic, a claim that historians say was based on the over 2 million lines written about Zoroaster contained in the ancient royal library of Alexandria. Tragically, the Christian Roman Emperor Theodotus I ordered this library destroyed in 391 CE. The largest resurgence of Zoroaster magic employed by the mystics since the destruction of the ancient royal library of Alexandria occurred in the 13th century among the Cathars who lived in southern Europe. The Cathars were ascetic Christians who renounced the accumulation of material wealth, refrained from sexual pleasures, and lived extremely austere lifestyles. By doing so, the Cathars were said to have attained mythical, mystic powers. Pope Innocent III, who lived from 1161 to 1216, ordered brutal crusades against heretics he viewed as threats to the Catholic Church, including the Muslims and the Cathars. It is sad to note when the power of Zoroaster magic once again began to reappear in the world, its threat to Christianity was considered undeniable, and it prompted the Pope to order a massacre of non-combatant Cathar civilians. Slaughter in Europe of this scale was not duplicated until the horrors of World War II. The most infamous quote from the Albigensian Crusade in southern France was, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own." But even a wholesale slaughter of those practicing the principles of Zoroastrianism could not stamp it out. These mystical practices simply went underground during the Middle Ages. Lao Tzu and the Way. Just a few decades after Zoroaster lived, an elderly Chinese philosopher was said to have written a small book of great wisdom called The Way, attributed to Lao Tzu, or Old Master, who lived from 580 to 500 BCE. Some of the work may predate his life by several centuries. For example, the earliest known Chinese manuscripts of the Tao Te Ching date from the late 4th century BCE and contain similar passages. Today, this philosophy is known as the Tao, or Taoism. Lao Tzu's understanding of nature, the universe, and the human condition still resonates to this day. According to common legend, his last lifetime as a human was lived in a small village in rural China, where he contemplated the essence of his own life. Like Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, Lao Tzu confronted his own thoughts, his reason for being on earth, and his myriad of past lives. In so doing, he recovered some of his own memory, human ability, and immortality. As an old man, Lao Tzu decided to leave the village and go to the forest to depart the body. The village gatekeeper stopped him and implored him to write down his personal philosophy before leaving. The following are some memorable passages from The Way. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. He who looks will not see it. He who listens will not hear it. He who gropes will not grasp it. The formless non-entity, the motionless source of motion, the infinite essence of the spirit is the source of life. Spirit is self. Simply see that you are at the center of the universe and accept all things and beings as parts of your infinite body. When you perceive that an act done to another is done to yourself, you have understood the great truth. One suffers great afflictions because one has a body. Without a body, what afflictions could one suffer? When one cares more for the body than for his own spirit, one becomes the body and loses the way of the spirit. The self, the spirit, create illusion. The delusion of man is that reality is not an illusion. One who creates illusions and makes them more real than reality follows the path of the spirit and finds the way of heaven. While the text's true authorship and data of composition or compilation are still debated, the work of Lao Tzu and the philosophy of Taoism live on to this day. Due to both its simplicity and depth, the Tao Te Ching remains one of the most widely read sacred texts. Its appeal is universal, and it has been found relevant by Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and even quantum physicists. The work describes the Tao as the mystical source and ideal of all existence. It is unseen, but not translucent, immensely powerful, yet supremely humble, and as being the root of all things. According to the Tao Te Ching, humans have no special place within the Tao, as we are just one of its many 10,000 manifestations. People have desires and free will and thus are able to alter their own nature. Many act unnaturally, that is, upsetting the natural balance of the Tao, which is absolute stillness. The Tao Te Ching intends to lead students on a return to their natural state in harmony with the Tao. Taoism is a religion in the sense of Houston Smith's phrase, chasing the divine, that addresses the quest for immortality, while its practice results is the experience of deep quiet and serenity. Language, religion, and conventional wisdom are critically assessed in the texts of Taoism. They are viewed as inherently biased and artificial, widely using paradoxes to sharpen the point. Instead, the concept of wu-wei, literally non-action or not acting, is a central point of the Tao Te Ching. The concept of wu-wei is very complex and reflected in the phrase's multiple meanings. Even in English translation, which can mean not doing anything, not forcing, not acting in the theatrical sense, creating nothingness, acting spontaneously and flowing with the moment. Lao Tzu used this term broadly with simplicity and humility as key virtues, often in contrast to selfish action. On a political level, it means avoiding circumstances such as warfare, harsh laws, and overly burdensome taxes. Some Taoists see a connection between wu-wei and esoteric practices, such as the sitting in oblivion or emptying the mind of bodily awareness and thought. These concepts are also found in the works of the influential Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi.
Biblical proportions. Another text that remains popular to this day is the Holy Bible, which is considered a sacred book by three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Many devout believers consider it to be the literal truth, direct from the Creator God, Yahweh, or any number of different names. Others treat the Bible with great respect, but believe that it was written by human beings and as such is a complex and often contradictory document. Modern scholars believe that the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh, was composed by 4 or 5 writers between 1000 to 400 BCE based on much older traditions. The New Testament was composed by a variety of writers between 60 to 110 CE. The contents of the New Testament were formalized by Ananias of Alexandria in 367 CE and finally canonized in 382 CE. There are many disagreements about the order and composition of the Bible between various religions and sects, some of which are doctrinal in nature. The Genesis story written by the Jewish people describes angels or sons of gods mating with women of earth who bore them children. The Genesis story also mentions that Yahweh designed our human biological bodies to live for 120 years or longer. However, these days, human bodies on earth only last about half that long. The Nephilim were an antediluvian race, which is referred to in the Bible as giants. Genesis 6:4 states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." The Nephilim were a race of giants that were produced by the sexual union of the sons of God, presumably fallen angels, and the daughters of men. Translated from the Hebrew text, Nephilim means fallen ones. They were renowned for their strength, prowess, and a great capacity for sinfulness. The wickedness of the Nephilim carried with it a heavy toll. Genesis 6:5 alludes to the corruption that the Nephilim caused amongst humans and themselves. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become. Their evil rebellion had incurred both the wrath and grief of God. According to the Bible, God instructs the angel Gabriel to ignite a civil war among the Nephilim. He also chose Enoch, a righteous man, to inform the fallen angels of the judgment pronounced on them and their children. God did not allow the fallen angels any peace, for they could not lift their eyes to heaven and were later to be chained.
The end of the Nephilim came about in the war incited by Gabriel, in which the giants eventually annihilated each other in several spectacular battles with fantastic weapons and flying machines. The Old Testament of the Bible reports the story of a human named Ezekiel who witnessed what can be described as a spacecraft or an aircraft landing. The sighting took place near the Chebar River in northern Mesopotamia. Chaldea is the current day country of Iraq. Ezekiel's technical description of the craft uses archaic language, but is nevertheless an accurate description of an antediluvian saucer or a scout craft. It is similar to the sighting of Vimanas by the people in the foothills of the Himalayas. Temple of Solomon. As the spiritual heart of several esoteric societies, the Temple of Solomon was built atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a site that is still venerated by adherents of the three great monotheistic religions. True believers claim that it is located at the intersection of the human and divine along key ley lines and is also the source of a natural spring. Supposedly built by King Solomon at the peak of ancient Israel's power, the Temple of Solomon was said to house the golden Ark of the Covenant in its Holy of Holies, a sacred chamber where the high priest would communicate directly with God. Centuries after the temple's destruction, during the Middle East Crusades, the Temple Mount was used as a headquarters of the Knights Templar. Since then, through the centuries, countless legends have been passed down about the secrets the Templars may have uncovered under the Temple Mount. The Order of the Temple, or Templary, established their headquarters on the very site of the Temple of Solomon. What they wanted most were ancient scrolls purportedly inscribed onto copper. Working stealthily to excavate a secret vault beneath the temple, the Templars obtained a great hidden treasure, which they knew would be there. This treasure was apparently the true reason for their presence in Jerusalem. Part of the treasure may have been actual gold and jewels, and that would help to account for the meteoric rise in wealth which the Templars are known to have achieved. But the greatest treasure, if obtained, would have been the sacred copper scrolls containing ancient esoteric knowledge about the secrets of Jesus and the Bible. What was the secret knowledge the Templars worked so hard to extract? Many researchers will say in a single word, it was enlightenment. But this was not to be simply a psychological transformation or transubstantiation of the flesh, body, and bone into a body of light, as what was seen in the resurrection body of Christ. Rather, what the scrolls principally described was the way to return to the way of life founded on the principles of the Bible, which one could speculate might have been another version of the Zoroastrian commitment to sustaining the truth. The Templars gaining this knowledge may have marked the loss of the esoteric traditions described as the Illuminati, and better known as ascended masters. Subsequent and current use of the term Illuminati is a false and corrupt use of its earlier meaning, as will be described later. As mysteriously as the scrolls were acquired, they also vanished mysteriously. There is evidence suggesting that a secret vault hidden beneath the floor of the Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh, Scotland, may hold some of the long-lost relics once possessed by the Knights Templar. After all, Roslin's chapel floor plan resembles a section of the ancient Temple of Solomon. Roslin Castle and the environs, under the Earl of Sinclair, allegedly became the headquarters of the Knights Templar after they fled arrest in France in 1307, when King Philip IV violently suppressed the Templars and forced the remaining members into hiding and exile. The poor Knights Templar. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, commonly known as the Knights Templar, were among the most famous of the Western Christian military monastic orders. The organization existed for approximately 2 centuries in the Middle Ages. It was founded in the aftermath of the First Crusade of 1096 to ensure the safety of the many Europeans who made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem after its conquest. The Knights Templar founded the Holy Grail Mystery School, developed from a synthesis of the gnosis they had acquired from the Johannites, the Kabbalah received from the Jews, the alchemy traditions they assimilated from the Sufis, and possibly the information they derived from the Copper Scrolls. The esoteric mysteries of the Templar school are incorporated within the legends of the Holy Grail, the best of which is Parasol, written by Knight Wolfram von Eschenbach in the Middle Ages. The story portrays the journey of Parasol as he evolves into an enlightened fisher king. The guide along the path is Kundry, the personification of the alchemical Kundalini. The Templars' impoverished status as monks did not last long. They had a powerful advocate in Bernard of Clairvaux, a leading church figure and a nephew of one of the founding knights. He spoke and wrote pervasively on their behalf, and in 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the order was officially endorsed by the Catholic Church. With this formal blessing, the Templars became a favored charity across Europe, receiving money, farmland, businesses, property, and noble-born sons from families who were eager to help with the fight to secure the Holy Land. Another major benefit came in 1139 when Pope Innocent II's papal bull Ome Datum Optimium exempted the order from obedience to local laws. This ruling meant that the Templars could pass freely through all borders and were not required to pay any taxes. They were subject to no other authority than the Pope. By 1150, the order's original mission of guarding pilgrims had changed into a mission of guarding their riches through an innovative way of issuing letters of credit, secret encryption techniques, and guarantees to protect a traveler's assets. In many ways, the order was an early precursor of modern banking. Based on a mix of donations, looted treasures, and shrewd business dealings, the Templars established a vast financial network across the whole of Christendom. New members of the order were also required to swear vows of poverty, oaths of loyalty, and hand over all their possessions to the collective wealth of their new family in the monastic brotherhood. This could include land, horses, and any other items of material wealth, including labor from serfs and any business interests. The order acquired large tracts of land, both in Europe and the Middle East, and also on islands in the Mediterranean Sea. They bought and managed farms and vineyards. They built castles and churches. They were involved in manufacturing, importing, and exporting, including the transfer of valuables, and they had their own fleet of ships. At one point, They even owned the entire island of Cyprus. By any measure, the Order of the Knights Templar appropriately qualifies as being the world's first multinational corporation. Gaining this much power was bound to challenge even the mightiest institution. The Knights Templar organization was violently disbanded in 1307 by King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the order. He pressured Pope Clement V to condemn the order's members, have them arrested and tortured into giving false confessions, and burned many of them at the stake in an effort to seize their wealth and erase his debt. The omen of Friday the 13th is related to the date in October 1307, when the order was sabotaged, betrayed, and technically destroyed. Bankers never die. A sizable contingent of Templars fled to the newly established Switzerland, where they reformed their international banking system, and whose descendants, with enormous holdings, secretly control the economy of Earth even to this day. After all, like Templar practices, banking in Switzerland is characterized by stability, privacy, and protection of clients' assets and information. The country has a long tradition of bank secrecy dating back to the Middle Ages. The gold of the Knights Templar that didn't make it into the secret Swiss bank accounts, including some gold that dated back to King Solomon and other Templar treasures, were supposedly hidden around the Languedoc region of southern France. That Templar gold was partly recovered by the Nazis during secret excavations, who then delivered as much as they could to Argentina at the conclusion of World War II. Other Nazi gold was confiscated by the Allies and deposited into the Federal Reserve System. This twice looted gold eventually became the basis of the CIA's off-the-books operational black funds during the post-war years. Some centuries later, a Bavarian Illuminati secret society arose that continues to operate alongside the international banker as an unseen influence. While considered esoteric, at least in the sense of possessing secret knowledge, as stated earlier, this was a corruption and theft of the term Illuminati, and representing the opposite of the original meaning, that of becoming enlightened individuals or ascended masters. Their banks have operated covertly for decades as agent provocateurs to covertly promote and finance weapons and warfare between nations. The Vatican's Swiss bank connection to stolen Nazi gold has links to Western investors. An excellent modern example has been documented in the World War II financing of the Third Reich by Prescott Bush, a pre-war director of Union Banking Corporation, UBC, and family patriarch of President George Bush and his son, President George W. Bush. After the USA declared war on Germany in 1941, UBC assets were held by the government for the duration of the war, then returned afterward. UBC was eventually dissolved in 1951. Prescott Bush was on the board of directors of UBC and held just one share in the company. For this, he was reimbursed $1,500,000. These assets were later used to launch Bush family investments in the Texas energy industry. The complicity of the Swiss banks and the U.S. government in funding the Nazi regime was established at the end of World War II. It is important to remember that warfare is an internal mechanism that is used to exert fear-based control over a population. The purpose of the senseless genocide and carnage of wars, as financed by these international banks, is to distract and divert human beings from our core essence as spiritual beings here on earth, thus preventing us from sharing open communication and cooperating together in activities that might enable us to prosper, to pursue enlightenment, end all wars, and escape this materialistic imprisonment. The Illuminati has been manipulating Western civilization for at least the last 2 centuries, likely for much longer, and under different assumed names. Esoteric America. Few people understand the degree to which secret societies like the Masons wield power and control behind the scenes in our world. From its earliest days, the United States served as an arena for the revolutions in alternative spirituality, which eventually swept the globe. Modern esoteric philosophies and personas, from Freemasonry to spiritualism, from Madame Blavatsky to Edgar Cayce, dramatically altered our nation's culture, politics, and religion. Yet our nation's mystical and metaphysical roots are often ignored or overlooked. For example, some transcendentalist founders of our country, such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, were influenced by a belief in deism, out of which grew the idea of manifest destiny, the right or divine plan to forge a new nation, often despite the destruction of cultures, yet with utopian ideals as described by Emerson and Thoreau. Sir Francis Drake claimed many of the lands that subsequently became the United States and Canada for the Crown of England, including the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, and the entire East Coast. Also claimed were the mysterious Oak Island in Nova Scotia, where Templar Knight Prince Henry Sinclair or Sir Francis Drake may have buried treasures or other artifacts. Rumors of Inca gold plundered by Spanish galleons and later pirated by Sir Francis Drake persist to this day on the tiny Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia. Tales of hidden treasures across the region spur many adventurers seeking out the mythical money pit. A few decades after Drake, Sir Francis Bacon viewed the virgin land of the newly discovered North American continent as the perfect place to practice his mystical philosophy. Sir Francis Bacon's work, The New Atlantis, published a short time before his death in 1626, was a utopian vision of a benevolent kingdom. According to many scholars on the subject, Bacon planned to implement his ideas in North America. In 1606, he drafted the charter of the Virginia Company and later oversaw the Jamestown settlement on the East Coast and the development of the Virginia lands. Thus, Bacon had a very big hand in the first permanent and successful white settlement in the north of the new continent, a settlement from which the nation of the United States eventually grew. Many historians contend that Bacon and other influential Elizabethan figures like Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and John Dee all belonged to a secret order and sought to perpetuate their ancient tradition on the new unoccupied continent. In the nature of its symbolism and mystical beliefs, the order is said to have been Rosicrucian. This is a very interesting connection for Grail seekers because the founder of the medieval Rosicrucian order, Jean de Gizers, is believed by some to be the founder of the now famous Priory of Sion, or the Guardians of the Grail. Voluminous research conducted on this topic leaves little doubt that some kind of esoteric doctrine likely lies at the foundation of the British colonies that became the United States. In addition to the Baconian philosophy and similar doctrinal evidence, this theory finds a great deal of support in the profound display of Masonic and otherwise esoteric symbolism present in the architecture of Washington, D.C., and other important locations. Enter the Masons. The secrecy of the Masons allowed prominent, disgruntled, and empowered colonists to gather and conspire against British tyranny. This disaffected group, gathering as Masons, eventually established the new and independent country of the United States. Yet few history books touch on this important piece of American history. At the time of independence in 1776, Masons were highly respected. Of the 55 delegates, 9 signers of the Declaration of Independence were confirmed Masons, as were 5 non-signing delegates. Yet, as the Masons became more powerful after the Revolution, they also became more corrupt. By the late 1820s, an anti-Masonic movement swept the nation when a murder scandal decimated Masonic membership. The decline was a result of the Masons in upstate New York, who were accused of murdering a man named William Morgan, who threatened to expose their secret rituals. It is important to that interest returned by the 1850s. When examined closely, there is an undercurrent of occult and esoteric ideas permeating the foundation of the USA. Perhaps the United States is in part a Templar, Baconian, Masonic effort to advance human society on the basis of secret knowledge and secret activities, much as fables about the Illuminati claim. But what knowledge and what is the motivation? It needs to be clarified and restated that the true Illuminati ideas formerly associated with enlightened beings and ascended masters have nothing to do with the Bavarian Illuminati and its modern offshoots. The Illuminati conspiracy, launched in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt of Bavaria, was a false and corrupt use of the term, and rightly denounced by true Masons of the time. Central to Masonic symbolism are images of wisdom and light. During Masonic initiations, a candidate is given the question, "What do you desire most of all?" The perceived answer is more light. Light signifies knowledge, or more properly, wisdom. The purpose of proper Freemasonry is to make good men better by imparting ethical teachings and esoteric knowledge, seemingly, when deeply understood, impart wisdom. Freemasonry was one of the earliest societies to advocate self-rule, and this is why it was so popular with the founding fathers. Freemasonry elected their own leaders. They had a secret ballot. They had a separation of powers. They were governed by a constitution. All these elements were very influential in the shaping of self-government as conceived by the founding fathers. If there is anything sacred about America, it is the idea that God is the author of our being, and hence the source of our freedom, sovereignty, rights, justice, and human dignity. These very Masonic concepts have been injected into the social political institutions of our nation by these great Masons who were among the founders of the American experiment. George Washington was a Mason, along with 13 other presidents and numerous Supreme Court justices. Benjamin Franklin published a book about Freemasonry on his own printing press. Of the 9 Masonic signers of the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock has the biggest signature of them all. In addition, some of the greatest names of the American Revolution were Masons: Ethan Allen, Edmund Burke, John Claypool, William Dawes, John Paul Jones, Robert Livingston, Colonel Benjamin Tupper, and Paul Revere. Of the 40 signers of the Constitution, 9 were known Masons, 13 exhibited evidence of Masonic membership, and 6 more later become Masons. Since then, 14 out of the 43 presidents, that's 1 in 3, have been Masons. The last Master Mason to serve as president was Gerald Ford. Just as public Masonic influence and membership has plummeted in America since the mid-1800s, American values have also shifted. Remember, 200 years ago, most people still supported slavery. 100 years ago, most men believed that women did not deserve the right to vote. 50 years ago, many considered interracial marriage a sin. Only recently has gay marriage been accepted by a majority of American society. Over the long term, humanity is becoming more tolerant and compassionate, and Freemasonry still has millions of worldwide members, and they persist and conduct their arcane rituals in secret. Freemasons have been accused of everything from murder to devil worship to secretly controlling the U.S. government. Take a $1 bill, turn it over, and look at the Great Seal of the United States on the back. Now draw a six-pointed Star of David over it. One point will match up with the top of the all-seeing eye, a common Masonic symbol. Now look at the letters at the other points of the star, and they spell out M-A-S-O-N. Freemasons do not consider themselves a secret society, but rather a society with secrets. Of crystals and rune stones. There are many historical questions that may soon have definitive answers. Advanced space travel technology and Stargate technology like CERN in Switzerland, which are by extension time machines, will eventually reveal everything. Or more precisely stated, once known technologies are released, complete understanding of anti-gravity, interdimensional space travel, and the space-time continuum will give us the added bonus of being able to peer back to any moment in time of our choosing with the aid of looking glass technology. This is achieved by activating the crystalline Akashic records that contain the complete 3D and historical record of our past, not only on Earth, but throughout the universe. The yellow cube technology has already been demonstrated by gray aliens over 50 years ago as part of an ET technology trade in exchange for permission to let them operate covertly on Earth. According to Navy intelligence whistleblower William Cooper, quote, the aliens showed a hologram which they claimed was the actual crucifixion of Christ, which the government filmed. Similarly, when this technology is revealed, there will be no such thing as controversy, a cover-up, a conspiracy theory, or a secret of any kind. There will be no such thing as a conspiracy because all history will be accessible by everyone. So is it any wonder that the people who have been privy to this knowledge do not want it released? Just imagine the possibilities when the reverse-engineered sun disk or looking glass technology is released to everyone. You may recall the ancient device of Mu that allowed users to view past lifetimes and glimpse future events. Talk about the killer app on your smartphone. Would you like to learn about your past lives, or are you interested in a specific moment of history? Would you like a glimpse of environmental conditions on the planet 100 years from now or a million years ago? With this app, we can peer back and watch the Vikings leave rune stones in the interior of North America, or the Passion Play, and recount the last moments of Jesus Christ as seen by the generals and scientists during the first demonstration by the Greys of the Yellow Cube, or even go further back to pre-sand Egypt, Atlantis, or to the older sagas throughout the long history of this planet. Other top moments to investigate in North American history could include the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon, the Phoenicians collecting copper in the Lake Superior region, the Vikings exploring, colonizing, influencing, and interacting with Native Americans, or Sir Francis Drake discovering and sailing around the San Francisco Bay in Northern California. When we enjoy looking along the timeline of history, let's also peer into the origins of several great prehistoric civilizations, including non-Madal in the Pacific and the high culture of the Mayan in Central America. Reading the Essene Gospel of Peace and other long or edited version of the Dead Sea Scrolls would also be quite interesting. Can you imagine how much there will be to learn from our past? Certainly, the release of looking glass technology will utterly change the world as we know it, and will usher in a true age of transparency. It is said that history is written by the victors. With this technology, every single historical record will get a new look and revision, if necessary, along with a true dating in the archaeological record. After all, as modern science, archaeology dates only to the 1840s, in the early years of the Victorian Age. We have so much to learn about the planet's true history. In the next chapter, we'll turn to the lost continents on Earth and the advanced civilizations they once supported.